Jeff Beck didn't just think he was the best guitarist in London. People told him that every night. Club owners, musicians, even critics said the same thing. Nobody plays like Jeff. And he believed it. So when he walked into a small, dim London club in 1966, he expected another easy night. Maybe impress a few players, maybe blow someone off the stage. Nothing unusual. But then the room shifted. A quiet American walked through the crowd, holding a beat-up Stratocaster like it was a part of his body, left-handed, soft-spoken, almost shy. Nobody knew who he was, but Jeff Beck felt something, a strange tension in the room, like every musician suddenly stood up straighter. Then the American stepped onto the stage, and the moment Jimi Hendrix played his first note, everything changed. London in 1966 was the center of the musical universe. The Beatles had conquered the world. The Rolling Stones were redefining rock and roll. And beneath the surface of those massive bands, a competitive guitar scene was brewing that would shape the sound of the next decade. Jeff Beck was at the heart of it. He'd recently left the Yardbirds, the band that had already produced Eric Clapton as a guitar legend. Beck had filled those shoes and then exceeded them. His playing was technical, fearless, and innovative. He used feedback before most people understood what feedback was. He bent strings in ways that made other guitarists lean forward and squint, trying to figure out how he did it. Other musicians watched him with a mixture of admiration and envy. When Beck walked into a club, conversation stopped. When he played, people took notes, mentally or literally, trying to decode his techniques. The London guitar world was small enough that everyone knew everyone. Clapton, Jimmy Page, Pete Townsend, they all crossed paths regularly, attended each other's shows, jammed together after hours. There was camaraderie, but also fierce competition. Who had the fastest fingers? Who could play the cleanest blues? Who understood tone better than anyone else? And the consensus by late 1966 was clear. Jeff Beck was at the top. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned his reputation. Not arrogant, but aware. He knew what he could do with a guitar. He'd proven it night after night, studio session after studio session. His work on the Yardbirds' Over Under Sideways Down and Shapes of Things had redefined what rock guitar could sound like. Aggressive, experimental, unafraid of dissonance. Beck didn't need to brag. The music spoke. But then the whispers started. Quiet at first, musicians talking in corners of clubs, passing rumors like trading cards. "Have you heard about the American?" someone said. "He plays behind his back." Someone else said he plays with his teeth. Another claimed he could make a guitar sound like it was crying, laughing, screaming, all in the same solo. Beck heard the rumors. He dismissed most of them. Every few months someone new arrived in London claiming to be the next big thing. Americans especially loved to come over, thinking they could impress the British musicians who learned from American blues records. Most of them were good. Some were very good. But none of them had really challenged the top tier of London's guitar elite. This American, though, Jimi something, the rumors about him were different, more specific, more unsettling. Musicians who'd seen him play didn't just say he was good, they said he was doing things no one here thought possible. They said watching him play felt like witnessing the future of the instrument. Jeff Beck filed those rumors away. He'd believe it when he saw it.
The club was small, tucked away in a Soho basement. Low ceilings, cigarette smoke hanging in the air like fog, maybe 100 people packed into a space meant for 70. This was the kind of place where real musicians came to play, not the polished venues where bands performed for screaming fans. Here, you played for other players. Here, your reputation was built or destroyed in a single set. Jeff Beck arrived late, as he often did. Fashionably late, some would say, though Beck would have said he just lost track of time. He moved through the crowd easily, recognized but not mobbed. A few nods, a few handshakes. Other guitarists gave him respectful distance. The band on stage was competent but unremarkable. Standard blues progressions, adequate solos, nothing that demanded attention. Beck found a spot near the back wall, ordered a drink, and settled in to watch. Then Chas Chandler appeared. Chandler had been the bassist for the Animals, one of the biggest British invasion bands, but recently he'd left the band to become a manager. Beck knew him casually, the way all London musicians knew each other. Chandler was walking through the club with purpose, and beside him was someone Beck had never seen before. A black American, tall and thin, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been pulled from a charity bin. A military jacket, bright scarf, wild hair that defied gravity and logic. He carried a white Stratocaster strung upside down for left-handed playing, the guitar hanging from his shoulder like it had grown there. He moved quietly through the crowd, eyes down, not seeking attention, almost shy. The musicians in the room noticed him immediately. Conversations paused, eyes followed. There was something about his presence, not aggressive, not showy, but undeniable, like everyone in the room instinctively knew someone important had just walked in. Chandler spoke briefly with the band on stage. Beck couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw the bassist nod enthusiastically. The singer announced they had a special guest, an American guitarist who just arrived in London. Please welcome Jimi Hendrix. Scattered applause. Most people in the room had never heard the name. Jimi stepped on stage with that same quiet presence. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just plugged in his Stratocaster, adjusted the volume knobs with careful precision, and waited for the band to start. Beck watched with mild curiosity. He'd seen this before. American guitarist, plenty of confidence, probably decent technique. He'd watch for a few minutes, then decide whether it was worth staying. The band kicked into a blues progression, standard 12-bar, E, A, B7, nothing complicated. Jimi let them play through one cycle. Then he came in. The first note stopped Beck cold. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but there was something in the tone, fat, singing, sustained in a way Beck had never heard from a Stratocaster. The note bent upward slowly, crying, then dropped back down, and in that simple gesture, Beck heard something he'd never encountered before. This wasn't technique. This was conversation. The guitar was speaking. Within 30 seconds, Beck's casual interest had transformed into focused attention. His drink sat forgotten in his hand, his eyes locked onto Jimi's fingers. Jimi was playing rhythm and lead simultaneously, his thumb working the bass strings while his fingers danced on the higher notes. He bent strings behind the nut, changing pitch in ways that shouldn't have been possible. He used feedback not as an accident, but as a musical tool, coaxing controlled screams from the amplifier that resolved into melody. Beck's stomach dropped. Around him, other musicians were leaning forward, mouths slightly open, faces showing the same stunned recognition. They were witnessing something none of them had seen before. This wasn't competition. This wasn't someone trying to prove they were better. This was someone operating on a completely different level, in a completely different language that happened to use the same instrument.
Jimi's solo built slowly, methodically, like a story with chapters. He started with single-note lines, blues-based but expanded, using intervals and note choices that sounded simultaneously familiar and alien. Then he added double stops, playing two strings at once, creating harmony with himself. Then he did something Beck had never seen. He reached up with his left hand and bent the strings behind the nut, behind the tuning pegs, creating pitch variations that turned the Stratocaster into something that sounded like a sitar, a violin, a human voice. The technique was so unexpected, so outside the conventional understanding of how a guitar worked, that several musicians in the room actually gasped. Beck felt his hands go numb. He'd spent years mastering the guitar, years studying blues players, jazz players, rock players, years developing his technique, his tone, his approach. He thought he understood the instrument's possibilities. He thought he'd pushed those possibilities further than almost anyone alive. But watching Jimi play, Beck realized he'd been thinking too small. Jimi wasn't just playing fast or technically, he was reimagining what the guitar could be. Every phrase, every bend, every use of feedback or distortion or sustain was purposeful, musical, serving the emotional content of the song rather than just showing off. The solo climaxed with a cascade of notes that seemed to pour out of the amplifier like water, then resolved into a single, sustained note that Jimi manipulated with his whammy bar, making it wobble and cry before fading into silence. The room erupted in applause, not polite applause, shocked, genuine, overwhelmed applause. Musicians who competed with each other every night were applauding with their hands above their heads, shaking their heads in disbelief. Beck stood frozen against the back wall. His mind was racing, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Part of him wanted to run on stage, grab Jimi, and demand to know how he did it. Part of him wanted to walk out immediately and never touch a guitar again. For the first time in his life, Jeff Beck felt inadequate. He'd always known there were players better than him in specific areas. Clapton had a purer blues touch, Page had more versatility, but Beck had always believed his combination of technique, tone, and innovation put him at the top tier. Now, watching Jimi pack up his guitar and quietly step off stage, Beck understood he'd been deluding himself. He wasn't at the top. He wasn't even close. Beck left the club without speaking to anyone. He walked the streets of Soho for hours, not seeing the crowds or the lights, just replaying Jimi's performance in his mind, every note, every bend, every impossible technique. By the time he got home, Jeff Beck had made a decision that terrified him. He was going to quit playing guitar.
Years later, Jeff Beck would talk about that night with unusual candor. In interviews, usually guarded about his emotions, he'd admit what he felt watching Jimi Hendrix play. "He wiped the floor with all of us," Beck said. "I didn't even know those sounds were possible. I thought I understood the guitar. I thought I'd pushed it as far as it could go. Then Jimi showed me I'd barely scratched the surface." In the days following that club performance, Beck isolated himself. He didn't return calls. He didn't attend sessions. He sat in his apartment with his guitar, trying to recreate what Jimi had done, and failing repeatedly. Other London guitarists were having similar crises. Eric Clapton saw Jimi play and famously told Chandler, "You've got to let me go on before him, or I won't have the nerve to go on at all." Pete Townsend watched Jimi set his guitar on fire at the end of a performance and thought, "How am I supposed to follow that?" Jimmy Page saw Jimi play and immediately rethought his approach to recording guitar. But Beck's crisis went deeper. He'd built his identity around being the best, not in an arrogant way, but as a fundamental truth about who he was. Take away the guitar mastery, and what was left? He spent days not playing at all, just listening to records, thinking about music, questioning everything. Why did he play guitar? Was it to be the best, or to express something? If it was to be the best, and someone better existed, what was the point? Then Beck had a realization. Watching Jimi play, Beck had never felt like Jimi was trying to compete. Jimi wasn't trying to prove he was better than anyone. He was simply expressing what he heard in his head, using the guitar as his voice. That was the difference. Beck had been playing to impress. Jimi was playing to communicate. Beck had been treating the guitar as a tool for competition. Jimi treated it as a tool for expression. It wasn't about technique, it was about purpose. Jeff Beck didn't quit guitar. Instead, he reinvented himself. He stopped trying to be the fastest, the most technical, the most impressive. He started asking different questions. What do I want to say? What emotion am I trying to create? How can the guitar serve the music rather than dominate it? His playing changed dramatically. He explored sustain, letting notes ring and develop rather than rushing to the next phrase. He experimented with unconventional tunings, with feedback, with techniques that prioritized feeling over flash. He stopped comparing himself to other guitarists and started developing his own voice. The albums that followed, Truth, Beck, Blow by Blow, showcased a guitarist who'd moved beyond competition into artistry. His tone became legendary, recognized instantly by musicians around the world. His phrasing became more vocal, more expressive, more distinctly his. He never tried to play like Jimi. He took the lesson that the guitar's purpose was expression, not competition, and applied it to his own vision. Beck and Hendrix met several times over the following years. There was no rivalry, no tension, just mutual respect. Two artists who understood they were on different paths toward the same goal, using the guitar to say things words couldn't express. Jimi once told Beck, "I like your tone, man. It's singing." Coming from Hendrix, it was the highest compliment possible. Beck later said, "Jimi expanded everyone's idea of what was possible. He didn't close doors, he opened them. The shock of seeing him play nearly ended my career, but it also saved it because it forced me to stop trying to be the best and start trying to be myself."
The night Jeff Beck walked into that Soho club expecting another ordinary performance became the most important night of his musical life. He went in as London's top guitarist, secure in his abilities, confident in his position. He left questioning everything he thought he knew about music, about the guitar, about himself. But that crisis became transformation. The shock that nearly made him quit became the spark for his most innovative work. The moment of humility opened doors to decades of artistic evolution. Beck and Hendrix reshaped each other indirectly. Jimi's genius forced every guitarist in London to break their old limits, and those guitarists, inspired and humbled, went on to create the sounds that defined rock music for generations. The story isn't about defeat, it's about awakening. Sometimes witnessing someone greater than yourself isn't the end, it's the beginning of discovering who you really are.